The world is full of problems. We are living in the middle of chaos. We are sad, depressed, angry, frustrated, resentful, one problem after the other. Where is God? Where is God? Humanity is dying. We all are forced to be more selfish to survive in this cruel world. Families are becoming broken. Youngsters are feeling unworthy, unloved, useless. They are killing themselves. Suicide. Everywhere. Suicide. Save the world? Firstly, how are you going to save yourself? But what if I told you there is one man, a brave soul, a hero, a God, to save us, to guide us, to lead us into a righteous future? How did a professor from Canada become the Christ figure to millions of people around the world?
So I'm going to tell you today about a way of looking at the world that I think is substantially different.
Jordan Peterson is a public intellectual, Canadian media personality, clinical psychologist, author, and professor emeritus at the University of Toronto. Jordan Burnt Peterson was born on 12 June 1962. He was born and raised in Alberta of Canada. Peterson obtained his bachelor's degree in political science and psychology from the University of Alberta and PhD in clinical psychology from... Wait, am I boring? I know. Let's go to the interesting stuff. On 27 September 2016, Dr. Peterson released a video entitled Professor Against Political Correctness. Before that, you need to know something about a law called Bill C-16. The Canadian government enforced the law Bill C-16 on 17 May 2016. You know pronouns, right? For a man, we call he or him. For a woman, she or her. So the Bill C-16 introduces a set of pronouns for transgenders and says everyone in Canada should use the preferred pronouns compulsorily. Anyone who does not call a transgender by their preferred pronouns would be punished under the violation of Canadian Human Rights Act and the Criminal Code. Jordan Peterson saw it as a threat to free speech in Canada. So, he protested against the law with his students in October 2016.
And we have to be able to say what we have to say badly, or we won't be able to think at all.
These people are not your friends. Can we say, you know, and mark my words, that's the sounds of the barbarians pounding at the gates. Right.
I want to go talk to Peterson. Peterson, do you have any comments on the Nazi presence at your protest?
You mean
the presence of Nazis and white supremacists assaulting people at your protest? Do you have any comment on that?
Yeah, I don't like Nazis.
Trans people were physically assaulted at this rally in your name. Would you like to disavow that violence?
Yes.
So you wish that didn't happen, and you want to, and I'm going to post this online that you would like people to be more accommodating of trans people and people of color at your events in future.
I would like there to be no violence.
I'm a person of color, and I felt very accommodating here. I felt like my voice. Thank you very much.
I'm also a former Muslim, and I feel like this guy is the best.
You wanted to disavow. You wanted to disavow, and this is the disavowal. I am not an advocate of violence. I'm speaking out the way I'm speaking out because I think this is a route to no violence. And violence is lurking. And you can say that sounds like a threat.
There was no violence at our protest, though. There was violence at your protest. So what does that say about our views?
It's not my protest. You know, asking me continually freighted questions isn't very helpful if you actually want to have a dialogue. You have no idea if I'm your enemy. You have no idea about me.
You won't use my pronouns, so I'm pretty sure you're my enemy, yes.
Yeah, well, I know you think that, but I don't believe that using your pronouns is going to do you any good in the long run. I think it'll do quite the contrary.
What?
Is that your medical opinion?
What, is that your medical opinion? Like, you are aware that non-binary people are valid in the American Psychological Association.
Is that your opinion?
Yes, it is.
No, it's not. Right. So there's a reason I'm defending freedom of speech. And the reason for that is quite straightforward. The reason I'm defending freedom of speech is because that's how people with different opinions settle their opinions in a civil society. And if we lose that, so much you can't imagine. Now here's what's happened with Bill C-16 and the surrounding legislation. Free speech is the mechanism by which we keep our society functioning. It's as a consequence of free speech and the ability to speak. People can put their finger on problems, articulate what those problems are, solve them, and come to a consensus.
That day made him famous, not because he was a rebel and did a protest, but because he stood for righteousness and freedom of speech. Jordan Peterson talks for gender equality, but some pseudo-feminists accuse him that he talks only for men. But anyways, listen to me. No one can ever win a debate with Jordan Peterson.
The patriarchy.
Well, it's not the modern idea of the patriarchy, that's for sure.
I mean, that's my idea of the patriarchy, which is a system of male dominance of society.
Yeah, but that's not my sense of the patriarchy.
So what's yours?
Well, in what sense is our society male-dominated?
The fact that the vast majority of wealth is owned by men, the vast majority of capital is owned by men. Women do more unpaid labour.
A very tiny proportion of men, and a huge proportion of people who are seriously disaffected are men. Most people in prison are men. Most people who are on the street are men. Most victims of violent crime are men. Most people who commit suicide are men. Most people who die in wars are men. People who do worse in school are men. It's like, where's the dominance here precisely? What you're doing is you're taking a tiny substrata of hyper-successful men and using that to represent the entire structure of Western society. There's nothing about that that's vaguely appropriate.
Maybe you just think that women should be equally represented in the decision-making fora of our nation. Maybe that's really just about having proper equality in a body that's meant to be representative.
So there's a very wide array of jobs that are fundamentally done by men. So, for example,
Member of Parliament,
99.9% of
sorry,
bricklayers...
Alex, I'm going to stop sledging you now, I promise.
I'm happy to give my minute to Jordan.
99.9% of bricklayers are men. Should we have quotas for women?
Is bricklaying representative democracy?
That has nothing to do with the question. The question is if there's evidence of structural inequality and oppression because women aren't precisely represented at 50% in all professions at all levels, then why don't we have a conversation about having women represented in all professions at all levels? Well, why do we talk about the C-suite, for example? Why do we talk about politics and positions of power? Why don't we talk about it across the board?
Okay, so let's just pause and...
yeah, but that's because it's power.
You pose a question to Terry Butler. Go ahead and answer it, then we'll hear from the other panellists.
His question to me?
Well, yeah, if you'd like to answer the question about bricklayers...
There's nothing wrong with bricklayers.
Why there are no quotas in
not.
Jordan Peterson has a beautiful family. His wife Tammy Peterson, his son Julian, and daughter Michaela Peterson. He also has a cute little granddaughter. Hey, in the beginning, we were talking about saving the world, remember? Here we go.
Every man is not only responsible for everything he does, but for everything everyone else does. It also makes you disciplined, and once you're disciplined, like you're like a sharpened sword, man, like a well-tempered blade, and then you can go out there and operate in the world. Well, you should be afraid of taking risks and pursuing something meaningful. But you should be more afraid of staying where you are if it's making you miserable.
Jordan Peterson acts as a father figure to millions of youngsters around the world. His advices are not just blood-pumping motivational, but very intellectual and truthful.
I'm not talking about what makes you happy. It's a luxury to pursue what makes you happy. It's a moral obligation to pursue what you find meaningful. What you do with people who are afraid, and to some degree depressed, but certainly anxious, is you lay out what they're anxious about, first of all, in detail. What is it that you're afraid of? What might happen? And then you decompose it into small problems, hypothetically manageable problems, and then you have the person expose themselves to the thing that they're afraid of, and what happens isn't that they get less afraid. That isn't what the clinical literature indicates exactly. What happens instead is they get braver. And that's not the same thing, right? Because if you get less afraid, it's like, well, the world isn't as dangerous as I thought it was, you know, silly me. If you get braver, that's not what happens. What happens is, yeah, the damn world's just as dangerous as I thought, or maybe it's even more dangerous than I thought, but it turns out that there's something in me that responds to taking that on as a voluntary challenge and grows and thrives as a consequence.
Peterson was trolled online for his statement, "Clean your room," and for many other things too. He believes that one's room is a representation of one's mind.
What is your answer to young people for some of the really big problems facing humanity, like the climate catastrophe, like economic crisis, like the precarious job market? Because they just don't, like, you talk all this much about individual responsibility. Most of us are never going to be able to afford to have all of these assets to have responsibility over. So what is your advice beyond banal comments like clean your room?
People can do a tremendous amount of good for themselves and for the people who are immediately around them by looking to their own inadequacies and their own flaws and the things that they're not doing in their lives and starting to build themselves up as more powerful individuals. And if they're capable of doing that, then they're capable of expanding their career. And if they're capable of expanding their career and their competence, then they're capable of taking their place in the community as effective leaders. And then they're capable of making wise decisions instead of unwise decisions when it comes to making collective political decisions. I'm not suggesting in the least, and have never suggested, that there's no domain for social action. I'm suggesting that people who don't have their own houses in order should be very careful before they go about reorganizing the world, which happens in many ways.
On 22 June 2022, he was banned from Twitter. Why? Peterson claimed that the transgender in the cover photo of a sports magazine influenced many young girls to do transgender surgery, and he did not like the idea of young girls misled into transgender ideologies.
Ellen/Elliot has undoubtedly, with his, her, their so-called courage, and remember, the White House itself has tweeted out every indication of believing in the courage of those who transition, enticed many a poor, confused adolescent, girl most likely, to blame her emergent pubescent self-consciousness, confusion, and discomfort on being born in the wrong body and believing that the courageous, self-affirming, and morally admirable route is hormonal treatment, sterilization, subjugation to a lifetime of expensive medical complication. How delightfully profitable is that? And misery. And I believe firmly that Ellen/Elliot, or whatever the hell her name or his name is, bears moral culpability for that. I say banned, although technically I have been suspended. But the suspension will not be lifted unless I delete the hateful tweet in question, and I would rather die than do that.
On October 28, 2022, Twitter was bought by Elon Musk. On November 19, 2022, Elon Musk brought Jordan Peterson back on Twitter.
I'm a huge fan of him. I read his book, Bob Rules, and I felt that he's really interesting guy.
I would like to leave a message for Jordan Peterson. Hi sir, hope you're doing well. Please live long. Live long. This world needs you. You saved me. You saved millions of lives. I love you, man. You are my hero. To my dear Jordan Peterson, or should I say, my dear God.